right, I think we have everyone here, so I will go ahead and call the Tuesday, May 12, 2020 Urbandale City Council meeting to order and ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Blake
has joined the meeting.
Carberry Montgomery.
Here.
Obrecht.
Here.
Hoagie.
Here.
Russell.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have everyone. Item 2, approve the agenda. Is there a motion?
Hoagie will move.
I guess I forgot to ask Nicole, were you planning to put this up, or are we going to do this by just by roll call for the lunch and learn? I forgot to ask you.
Just by roll call.
Okay, motion by Hoagie. Is there? Okay, second by Obrecht. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Hoagie.
Yes.
Obrecht.
Yes.
Blake.
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery.
Yes.
Russell.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, item 3 is on our agenda is the discussion regarding the economic development update. And to start us off, I'm going to turn it over to AJ. AJ.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, good afternoon. This was an item that we placed on to provide twofold. Number one was to kind of go over where our current economic development policies were and how we've applied them based on some questions we've received over the last several weeks. The second component of the meeting is kind of an update on some of the current programs we have and where we need to go in the future with them. Yesterday, I sent out some of the information. One was a duplicate of information that we had sent out previously as what we would entitle the economic development policies and procedures that
Join the meeting.
Following previously. And the second one was some additional information that staff wanted to review with council prior to any formal action for alterations or adoptions to some additional or some altered economic development policies and programs that we would then take forward through our economic development team. With that as a background, I will turn it over to Curtis Brown, Assistant City Manager, Economic Development Director, and he and Aaron DeYoung, our Assistant Director, will provide an overview of the material, answer questions that you may have at this point in time. So there, Mr. Mayor, if we could have Curtis, you're on.
Sounds good. Thank you, AJ. Just a couple notes here before we rapidly get over to Aaron. The presentation and information you'll see today was actually scheduled to be presented on Tuesday the 17th in March when everything started to happen with regard to coronavirus. The meeting was canceled, and so Aaron will be presenting the information that he had prepared for that meeting. Two main objectives, as AJ said. Number one, to provide an overview of the city's TIF districts, how they function, and we really hope that this will provide more context for our economic development agreements and how they're structured. Objective 2 is that we have worked with the ad hoc architecture and appraisal committee and advisory board to revise the determination of what makes projects qualified as Class A office buildings. So we have a recommendation that's been vetted by the architecture and appraisal committee and the advisory board, and that is just preparatory information for you because we'll ask the council to consider a council letter on this change on the Class A determination at the next meeting. So AJ referenced the memo on economic development incentives that we had shared with you a couple weeks ago and then again yesterday. Hopefully that was helpful. But the main, just 2 points before Aaron begins with a walk through the TIF districts. Our economic development policies are focused on, number one, encouraging expansion of the property tax base through new building investment. That is, as the phrase AJ often uses, property tax is the straw that stirs the drink. And so being the main funding source of the services that the city provides, really preserving and enhancing the property tax base is vitally important. Number two, our economic development incentives are used to eliminate blight and promote revitalization and investment. You see that happening right now at the southwest corner of 100th and Douglas with the Renaissance Place TIF district that is, or sorry, incentive policy that's in place there. 3, every economic development agreement must in some way encourage retention or expansion of employment opportunities. So with that in mind, we'll ask Aaron to dive into a bit in how our development incentives function, and then hopefully at the end of that, see how the property tax expansion works in the short and the long term. So with that, Aaron DeYoung, Assistant Director.
Now I'm unmuted. Mayor, let me know when you can see my slides.
I see him. I see him.
Great. Yeah, great. Well, thanks. Thanks, Curtis, for the teeing me up on this. So yeah, we want to go through all the TIF districts that we have in Urbandale, how it's kind of implemented, and then also the different categories of the incentives that we offer, which are scheduled rebates structures within our urban renewal plan. So I'll jump right in. There we go. So we have technically 4 TIF districts. 3 of them are active as of right now. The downtown Urbandale district, which is we'll call DUNA through this that goes along Earl Hay Road, Douglas Avenue, and then down 86th Street. The Westover Urban Renewal District, which is kind of around Buccaneer Arena. In that area, our largest and most active is the Northwest Market Center. That encompasses a lot of the commercial property here in the western part of town. And then the Fawn Creek, which is just north of Hickman, that was utilized for some public infrastructure projects about a decade ago. That one's pretty much hibernating right now with those. Here's a map of all of those, just so you can get a visual perspective of those. Again, seeing the Northwest Market area as being the large one, covering a lot of our commercial and industrial development that's happened over the last 2 decades. So looking at the TIF implementation, it's in the high level, it's TIF revenue is generated from the increase of property values within a district, whether it be land or whether it be the building parts of that valuation. So when a property goes from ag to being vacant and then having a building built on it, if it's in an urban renewal district, those revenues are collected in a different way than they are normally in a district when it's not in a district. And like Curtis mentioned, tax increment financing in Urbandale is used to encourage economic development and remediate blight, encourage revitalization, mainly through 2 ways. Actually, all through 2 ways. One is to pay for public infrastructure improvements. Great examples of that recently is the rehab of 104th Street as well as the 86th Street. Those were all utilized with increment generated within the Northwest Market area and the DUNA districts to pay for those, rather than having general fund revenues pay for those improvements. And then secondly is the incentives for encouraging investment or reinvestment in properties within those districts through tax rebates structures in a development agreement. So looking at our incentives, they've all been set up as an objective standard. We're trying to create do you meet them or do them not? And we like to, and they've been set up more as a by right policy. So if you meet these, then that is, will go to city council and be considered for approval. The nice thing about this is, one, it removes a lot of negotiation. Sometimes companies will come and ask, well, that's got to be your best. That's not your best deal. Give me another one. In Urbandale, we can gladly say, no, this is what we do. We're not used car salesmen. This is the offer that we will do, and it creates fairness amongst all projects that are looking at help. A second thing is it also meets the fair play agreement. This is the Des Moines Metro non-competition clauses that we've all agreed to that's required in urban renewal law. And having these by right policies within our urban renewal plans meets those standards, and so we can abide by those. A third benefit, which I didn't put on the slides, is that because our buy rate policies are in place and there's little negotiation, you save a lot of money on legal costs. If a community wants to try to nickel and dime or do a long drawn out process of getting to a development agreement, sometimes the legal fees can be pretty high in those cases because it is a very specialized work with that. And so Urbandale, we don't have those. We have in our annual budget, we have $15,000 for legal, and Curtis can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think we've ever met that in any of our years in doing this. Second, in implementing and importantly is having those employment requirements in there so that the development agreements are encouraging economic development and investment. All agreements do require positive employment with a project, and then also in projects, most recently being the Iowa Bankers Project, that if a business is relocating from another community, that they're to get the full benefits, there can be no decline in employment from where they were at prior to coming to town. There we go. Now we're going to go through the three set rebate structures that we have within our urban renewal plans. The first and the one that gets used the most is the 5-year sliding scale rebate. This is a decreasing rebate of the tax increment financing generated from just the building improvements to the property. And you can see the 5 years there. It starts at 75 and goes down by 15% each year until it goes to 0 in year 6. These are in the Westover and Northwest Market Center districts with that. And it's all available to office, commercial, and industrial developments. The one that's not on that, well, there's two main other categories. Residential is eligible, as well as retail uses are not eligible for this rebate. So when we go through each of these rebates, I'm going to show you a spreadsheet on kind of how the calculations are made when looking at the rebates. But we want to show an example project and have those go through each of these projects. So what I picked was the 9400 Plum project that was along Plum Drive, was built in 2019 by Landmark. It was a property that had ag designation for tax purposes prior to, and then there was a building built on it, about 10,000 square feet for office uses. This project did get the Class A office, but I'm going to use this project as the example for all the different categories. So Curtis knows this about me, but maybe not others do, but I sometimes dream in spreadsheets. So apologize for the deep dive in the calculations, but that's what helps get my brain around it. And so I want to walk you through, how a rebate calculations are made so that you know kind of where the taxes a business pays from the improvements to a property goes within an urban renewal district. First and importantly is to calculate what is the increment generated, what is the increased value. And it's important to keep in mind that there's two components to a property's valuation. There's the land component, and then there's the building component. And you can see here before development, 9400 Plum was ag designation, and ag lands are valued based on their productivity. And because this was pasture land, it had very little productivity. And so the county valued it at a whopping $2,000 for a 3-acre parcel. And then looking at that, there's also the rollback with that is, so property isn't taxed at 100% of value, it's taxed at a percentage of its full value. And for ag, it's just over 81%. And then looking at after the building was built, the land component also went up because it has higher productivity, and the building is also there. So there's a new valuation on that component. So looking at the actual values that this property received after development, the county's valuing the land at $320,000, the building at $1.3 million, resulting in a total of $1.62 million. And then the rollback gets applied. And for commercial property in Iowa, that rollback's at 90%. Then it's the looking at the application of the tax rates, and with tax increment financing, there's two parts of the tax rates that we pay close attention to. The total is what everybody pays with the dollars per thousand tax rate, and then the two components for TIF is the debt levy portion, and this is all the rates that all the jurisdictions have for their existing debt obligations. Urbandale has its debt levy, as does the school district, as does the county, and maybe a few others. And then what's not in those is then composed of the TIF rate. So everything outside of the debt levies for all the jurisdictions is what's used to calculate tax increment financing. And then I put the ag rate down there as well. Ag is taxed at a lower percentage with that, and so you can that calculation will come up later. So then the next is to go through the 5-year calculation on the sliding 5-year scale. So looking at the taxable value, this is the $1.6 million project or property, then applying the rollback. So that's 1.62 times 0.9 or 90% valuation for each of the 5 years. Then the total tax rate is applied with those. So the tax rate of 40.7 is applied to 1.45 million to get over the 5 years the property paying almost $300,000 in taxes. So the first thing you got to do when looking at figuring out what the TIF is for a project is to take out that debt levy component. So of the $300,000, 71,000 of it over the 5 years is going to all the jurisdictions for all their debt obligations. So they are receiving some of the benefit from the increased property from day one. So what's left is the TIF rate, and then we apply the rebate percentage to those. So here's the 5-year sliding scale. Now here's kind of where the magic happens in the way Urbandale applies this. So the TIF rebates are applied on only the building component of the increased valuation. So seeing here, these would be the estimated tax payments that this project will receive on a sliding 5 scale based only on their $1.3 million increase of the building. The land is still, the land increase is treated differently. And that's where these show up. So in the urban renewal districts, there's increment that's already existing and increment that will be created that is used for what I'm calling general district purposes. So this is like repaving 104th Street. That's revenue that's being generated from projects that have either already gone through their rebates or didn't receive a rebate, or from increases that have happened throughout the district to create an annual revenue source in the plan. So in the way Urbandale implements this is those uncommitted revenue projects, we utilize half of it for projects within the district, and then the other half is then given back to all the other taxing entities. And so you can see that these numbers are equal each year, and they're increasing each year because the rebate portion is decreasing over each year. So looking at over the 5-year period, here's how the 100% tax payments of this new property are being divvied up. So over the 5 years, a quarter of everything that the business is paying is going to the debt levies of all the jurisdictions. 27% of those payments were given back to them as the incentive. And then almost 50% is being used for other TIF projects within the district, or being given back to the taxing entities like they would have gotten if there wasn't an urban renewal district. So everyone's kind of receiving some benefit from the project happening in Urbandale. And then lastly on this is kind of a sum of the pre-construction versus the post-construction. So saying having this project in town would, before we were getting $54 from of property tax coming from this property, and after the construction we're getting $60,000 a year from the project. And then how that all gets divvied up is a quarter is going towards the debt levies of all the taxing jurisdictions, and then almost 40% is being shared. The other 40% is being shared by the TIF district for community-wide or projects within the plan, and then the other 50% is going back to all the entities. Does that make sense? I'll do a little soft pause here to see if there's somebody wants to go into a deep dive.
Any questions?
Yeah, Aaron, just a quick question.
Sure.
When does the clock start on the TIFs? Is it once the development started, or is it once they've got to full valuation?
Yeah, so the way that we do the development agreements is that the rebates are calculated based at full valuation. So if the project was half completed on a January 1, we wouldn't start it for that year. We would wait until the full valuation is hitting the tax rolls to then do the first year's calculation. Most companies would rather wait a year and get a full value for their 5 years rather than take a halvesies on the first year, just because the way it didn't line up right.
Thanks.
Aaron, the employment positive numbers, how's that calculated, and for how long do they have to maintain that level or get up to that level?
Right. So there's two different development agreements that we've been doing. One is a standard development agreement, and the requirement on the job site is that there must be employment at the facility. There isn't a specific number identified. A recent example would be, Curtis, help me out here. Well, the Remark Enterprises, the Broken Arrow rehab on Merle Hay. We didn't require a specific number of employment to be there, but that there be a net positive or employment happening at that facility. Whereas, yeah, go
I
ahead.
think the easiest way to describe it would be every annual certification. So every project needs to certify their claim in April of every year, and the developer has to show us the employment in that building. There has to be employment. So by virtue of building a new building, there almost is always new employment. But as you mentioned earlier, Aaron, sometimes on these intra-metro moves, we'll require the company to at least stay even, if not increase on that number.
Right. That, and then the second one that Curtis just mentioned is the example is the Iowa Bankers project that was just recently approved. That's a relocation from Johnston. When they applied for the city's local benefits, they had 190 positions. So in that development agreement, they needed to create to have 195 positions at the facility to be able to receive their full annual payment, and we'll look at that annual certification to make that calculation when that year happens. So if they're less than 195, say they're only at a 100, they would only get 195ths of that estimated payment.
And then my second question was, we give about half of it back to other taxing entities. I think it's used as the 38% in this example. As I understand it, we don't have to do that. We don't have to be a 50-50 give back. We could increase that. It'd take the city council motion to do that. But we could go to a 60-40 split or a 70-30 or 80-20. Is that a number that we've just kind of lit on for a number of years? And do we review it? Do we think we need to review it? And are we good with that?
I think that's an AJ and Mayor question.
Dave, this is AJ. The 50% rule has been in place in Urbandale for quite a long time. I could envision the only reason why the council one of the reasons the council would want to reconsider that is if you had an extraordinary project that needed to be serviced through the debt mechanism, where you needed to capture more than 50% of that
Okay.
increment to accomplish something physical. We had talked about it with the interchange project on 100th. We were able not to do that, but that's off the top of my head, that's the only, that would be a reason to do that, is that the city has chosen to construct something within the Northwest Market District, for example, that required us to capture more than 50% to secure the debt. And, or given our new normal that we may be facing, is there going to be a requirement to fund something within the city that requires you to take more than 50%? Now, remember, what is generated in the district has to be spent in the district.
Right.
So for general fund support, that would be a harder explanation to give versus we need to build something big and significant within the Northwest Market District that requires more than 50%.
Okay.
Just a quick follow-up on that. If we switch the formula, would it be retro to all the existing ones, or would that be prospective to all future programs then if we switched with mess with the formula?
Each year we certify the TIF debt, and we have to describe how we're going to be doing that. And we only certify the increment up to what we need, and we've always used that 50%. So Matt, that would be on an annual basis, but we'd have to look retroactively to see what that TIF was supporting, particularly for the debt, and to make sure that that we have that covered, because we've sold debt, and the mechanism for securing that debt or paying that debt off is, part of it's about $6 million a year we do for general obligation. The full taxing authority of the city pays for the debt that we borrow. Other portions of that is TIF, and that value changes each year depending upon how much debt we have within that TIF district and how much of that TIF we've used to secure that debt. So that will vary, but long answer to your short question, we'd have to look in the rearview mirror to make sure that our debt component is that we've met our obligations there. And then moving forward, the council could make some determination to alter that either up or down.
But Matt, you're asking whether we change what we would give back to other taxing jurisdictions specifically?
Well, no, I was just curious. I mean, if we mess with the formula, but we had entities that had moved in under this presumptive formula, would those kind of be grandfathered in under that formula? That sounds like we may adjust. And then if, again, I'm not saying I'm a proponent of it one way or other, but if we did move it up to 60%, would all future programs be at 60%? And then the others would stay at the 50. That's kind of what I was asking.
As for the specific development agreements on the books, the calculations will be the same for the business. So all of the existing private development agreements would stay the same. There wouldn't be adjusting the 50-50 or 60-40. That's all after the development specific agreements have been satisfied.
And I think we've been very on the 50% number that, that Dave asked about from a policy standpoint. In my experience, what we've always done is try to be very fair and not, we could grab more legally. And I think that's always been the question of the legislature as far as, and what's been looked at as far as TIF abuse by some cities. And some cities are obviously more aggressive than what we are. But I think we've always been pretty conservative, and also looking at this from a holistic standpoint of our city that this, we'll provide this, but we're going to do something that benefits all the jurisdictions. And also then in the long term, it's going to help everyone else out as well. So we're not going to grab as much as we possibly can, but we'll do what seems reasonable, but also benefit all the jurisdictions.
This is Nikki. Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you, Nikki.
I was just going to add to that just to clarify. So the 50% piece is specifically only related to the debt we have to service. So for Matt's question, Aaron is exactly right that it will not affect any DAs going forward. The amount we certify, we can go up to 50%, but only to the extent that we have outstanding debt. So as you look at the CIP program that we have built out, to Jay's point, that's the amount that we're going to do in project. But as we start to over or under offer bonds for TIF projects, I can only certify up to that amount. So for example, we are taking the full 50%, and that cash is on hand because then we can call the existing bonds that we've got paid off. So it's to service debt, but it has to be existing. So two pieces to that is the 50% is actually and only in the Northwest Market District, because that is our most significant. DUNA and Westover, Fawn Creek don't count towards that because there is so limited increment available. But Northwest Market is the one that would have a huge impact. So that, yes, just exactly reiteration of all of what you're saying there. Policy decision on the 50%, but it'll actually start to naturally come backwards, because if you'll recall the last couple of years, we've been calling and paying off TIF bonds pretty aggressively because I have been able to capture within that 50% enough cash to go ahead and pay them as soon as they're callable. So we've actively been doing that, and that 50% will start to wean back, which is a plus to the other taxing districts within our city limits. So just pointing that piece out, that the 50% has nothing to do with the existing DAs that we've got out there. That only affects my certification to the state, so they know how much of the increment to claim on the next tax bill. So just clarify.
I would also point out that if you look at other communities throughout the metro, it varies. City of Altoona, City of Norwalk capture a greater percentage of their total property that they have available within their boundaries for TIF districts to use for a variety of projects, versus us that we have the 4 districts and they're very specific. And as was mentioned, we do not utilize that for housing. Some cities in Iowa have long utilized TIF to promote housing, mostly in smaller communities or communities that are seeing a decrease in their population as incentives for people to move into their community. Urbandale has not had that, been put in that situation where we've had to incentivize home building. But there are certain regulations in place that if you use tax increment financing, for housing, that you have to set aside 10% to affect low and moderate income housing related projects. Again, as a policy, the council has not chosen to use that. I know the other cities, particularly Des Moines, has used a 5-year abatement program to encourage housing development in certain neighborhoods or to revitalization. But in our community, we haven't had to do that at this point in time. So that's the big difference between TIF when you use it for housing, is that requirement for the 10% set aside for low and moderate income.
All right. In fact, I think Des Moines even has even some more aggressive schedules too. I think they even have up to 10 years for new construction on a declining scale, and 100% for some large remodeling in Des Moines for residential too. So they're pretty aggressive on that. All right. Where are we?
We got more slides, Mayor. So that's the walkthrough of how the standard 5-year sliding scale rebate works. The second main category of the set rebates that we have within our renewal plans is the 3-year 90% rebate. This is in the Northwest Market Center along Douglas Avenue, what we call the Renaissance Marketplace area, for redevelopment projects with that. So to create a more aggressive rebate to encourage redevelopment along the Douglas Avenue corridor is in place, as well as within the DUNA area, downtown Urbandale. It's the 3-year 90 is the standard in the DUNA area for it. So and everything qualifies within DUNA to encourage the reinvestment in that area, except for residential projects. So retail does count as an eligible project within DUNA. All right, so then here's the spreadsheet again. Apologies if you don't like spreadsheets, but looking at how the 90%, 3-year 90% works here. I won't go through all the detail in the calculations, but get to the kind of the results. So during the 3-year period of the rebate for that project, again, 24% will go to the debt levy of all the jurisdictions. So that'll always stay because the TIF rate or the debt levy rate stays the same. The TIF rate rebate portion does go up. It goes up to the total taxes that the business has paid. They'll get 55% of it back during that. So you may think, well, why is it a 90% rebate, but they're only getting 55%? It's that increase in the land component that we're not rebating back to them is what ratchets that actual rebate payment down. Then you can see that the share of what's left, 50% going to the district for its other debt obligations, and then the other 50% going back to the entities as it normally would without an urban renewal area. And then you can see that here, then the next at the bottom is, after the 3 years are over, you can see the percentages are the same throughout all of these different calculations, is that 24% of the project's taxes are going to the debt levies, and then it's being shared again, almost 40% amongst those, the 50% splits. And then lastly is the Class A office incentive. This is in the Northwest Market Center. This is a 10-year, 90% TIF rebate, 2 qualifying projects. This is our highest incentive offer. And so there is also a larger process wrapped around this, and the most notable is the architecture and appraisal review panel reviews each and every project seeking this incentives to help provide a recommendation to City Council whether this meets the obligations with that. I won't get into what the obligations are because that's the second part of the presentation. So we'll get into a little more in that later. To date, 3 projects have been awarded through this. This is the Paradigm Building on Meredith, the R&R did. 9400 Plum, like I mentioned earlier, and it was the example. And then just recently, the Iowa Bankers Association at 9001 North Park. So here's the spreadsheet again. With that, except for over a 10-year period with this, the percentages are all the same as the 3-year 90. It's just that share is happening over a longer period of time for the 10-year 90% rebate. So again, 55% of the increased taxes are going back to the business as the incentive, and then at the end, it's going back to its normal percentages of a quarter going to service debt levies of all the entities, and then the 50-50% split happening there. So that walks through all of our 3 main incentives that we use for that. Curtis and I decided to put a pause in here too, so since we've gone through all of the first section of our presentation, to ask if you had any questions.
Just one question: the different districts of it can be a follow-up later. Is the expiration date on the districts? So when is the? So I was thinking there's a time frame where the district exists that we have to either renew or let it expire. So.
I'll ask Nikki to clarify, but I believe because each of those districts has what is characterized as a blight condition, that those do not expire. Is that correct, Nikki?
Yes, that's correct. They were actually established prior to the when those laws came into effect. They're pre-95, so they didn't have the restriction of that. Any new district that would be established after those rules changed, if it's defined as an economic development reason, which Northwest Market does have, would normally have a 20-year life unless you voluntarily put it on there, so it's automatic. But now if you have a slum and blight finding, and that was prior to 2012, then they did have an unexpiring life, which is true for Northwest Market. The slum and blight area specifically identified in that area is that section along Hickman with what we just tore down, that consumer lumber area. It was specifically designed there so that we could tear that down and renovate the public works building. So that's the authority. That's why it didn't have to go through a bond referendum. Those of you that are new that didn't hear that part a couple years back, that was specifically laid out and has always been the intent there, is to renovate all of that existing, it used to be a big forested area, and that consumer lumber building that was there, and repurposed. That is the area that is defined very specifically in Northwest Market. But by having that in place, it did allow us to not have a sunset on that district. So none of our districts have a sunset. You are.
Since Nikki brought up that public works building, can someone enlighten me if there was some controversy about that? I feel like those of us that were up for election last year tried to get, somebody tried to throw a few stingers at us in some public meetings about whether or not we agreed with the TIF use there.
Bridget, this is AJ. I'll comment on that, and then again, the rest of the staff, you can join in. Some of the discussion at the time was focused on other communities in Iowa that were, the discussion on a more statewide discussion basis was, you're using the provisions under the state code that allows you to avoid a referendum, and you're using them for public-based buildings. And those laws have made some alterations to them. But I believe on the meetings that I sat in and that was privy to some of those questions on some of those forums, I believe that was the tone of the discussion, is that you're using this tool that is meant for economic development and you're using it for a public purpose. If I'm not mistaken, I don't know if any of the other staff sat in those meetings, but that's what I took away from it. And those were based on some other conversations, or at least news articles that I was seeing across the state, saying that people were raising that as a point of contention, is that you're building a public building, public works, police station, city hall, doesn't matter, using a tool that was originally scheduled or designed for something differently than what you're using it for.
I'd just say that, AJ, that I guess I suppose that could be possible. The Northwest Market Center urban renewal plan clearly lays out, however, how reinvestment of whatever type, public or private, in that corridor, that especially a building like Consumers Lumber and the old public facilities that's down there, that new investment, there's a justification in the urban renewal plan how that investment does in fact help to revitalize what was a declining corridor there.
And I don't disagree, Curtis, in the sense, but maybe I should have stated it differently. I think people were applying some different philosophical positions on the use of TIF in general, whether it was outlined in your urban renewal plan or whether it was permitted by law. I think what I heard at some of those meetings were that people just, at least what I took away, was that they disagreed philosophically with the use of those types of monies.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Got a list of questions. I'm sorry, I'm having some connectivity issues, but I think I'm good for right now. So one of the biggest issues of the last couple weeks that I have had, and I guess if this was in the materials that was presented to us when the Iowa Bankers Association came through, I missed it, but what was in the paper indicated that their current employment number was 196, and we were only requiring 195 jobs. And I do not think that, I know jobs is only one component of what we're trying to achieve, but it appears to be, you've indicated it's more important when we're doing like a local relocation like that, but to have it right there black and white, and then we're saying our requirement is less than what they currently have, and then I believe it was even less than what the state was requiring. So I don't know if there's ways we can beef up the job requirement, or at least, especially when we're doing a state program, along with it, make sure that those numbers are in alignment.
Yeah, I'll take that part. So
Yeah.
the difference in the job counts is a result of when they applied to Urbandale versus when they applied to the state. Curtis and I, when they applied, they did say that they had 190 positions when they applied for the Class A office incentive. And then when they did it at the state, they had hired 5 or 6 more people in that time frame. So that's where the divide happened. The reason why it's 195 in our position is I did revise it up to give it to the last that I had seen from the state application. And then I guess ultimately the application that got sent had one more job in it. So there's the one that's the discrepancy in how that happened there.
Well, I still think it looks bad that actually, I mean, in this particular instance, we didn't actually require them to increase any jobs from what their current capacity is. And those are the issues where our residents who don't understand the intricacies of tax increment finance see, when these come out in the paper, just the job numbers and some of the other big numbers, and we don't look particularly good when those numbers come out.
We can sure appreciate that and can look closer at it in the future. One of the things is we've always, on the enforcement of the jobs, have really used the state as the backstop on that, because in the state contract, every single job matters. And so the company has a strong incentive for meeting their obligations under the state contract. So we've always had, this is an interesting one that it's brought it out clearly in black and white, how these employment numbers really matter and ultimately play out in the public. And so regardless of whether we counted on the state in the past or not to enforce those employment provisions, your perspective, council member, is certainly one we can take a close look at when we're matching up development agreements that are also applying for state.
Well, if they're going to be doing the accounting of it, we might as well be in alignment with theirs, especially if they're requiring more than we are. A couple of questions that I have is about the possibility, we've never done it, but as we look to do more affordable multifamily, I hope, could we use TIF as part of our toolbox? Because that's definitely going to create, if we're building new apartment complexes, it's going to create value. And then another question is, are we giving incentives to, I guess what I call the flex space buildings that are going up, like along Meredith? Recently one there at 100th, I believe it's 100th, or it's Urbandale and Meredith by Target, south of Target. Did we provide any incentives for that building?
Yes, and the retail portion, as served annually, if any portion of that is retail, that is not eligible for the rebate, and that will be prorated out. So it all ties back to what we're trying to encourage is development of those primary sector jobs. So those industrial, light industrial, office types of jobs.
Under what program? I mean, it's not Class A office space, So what is it, the 5-year sliding scale?
Correct.
Okay. I guess I'm going to be really blunt here. I don't see where those sorts of buildings on our major corridors are, I mean, obviously they're increasing the tax base, but they're not offering any aesthetic value. Or, I mean, to me, that corner at Target is much more prime for retail consumer uses than trying to put in office. We didn't have offering it consumer or that
I would say, I'm sorry. There was, oh, I'm sorry. At least I wasn't able to hear a lot of what you said.
You're breaking up a little bit, I think. Bridget, you're breaking up.
Oh, yeah, that's
When
awesome.
you're,
Because I said a lot.
tell your kids to get off the internet for a while.
Well, we have a dog visiting the house, so I think they're actually off the internet right now. I don't know. Did you hear me talk about possible use of TIF for affordable housing, multifamily? And then
You heard that part, but you moved up toward the end when you were talking about the Meredith Drive part.
yeah, I just am not a fan of the flex space stuff that we are incentivizing. I don't think it offers long-term positiveness. Our community, yes, it's raising tax base, but to me, it looks like a whole bunch of vacant warehouses with pretty fronts, and that's being questionable. So, and especially at like Meredith and 100th there by Target, I think that area, I mean, in this, you guys may think I'm totally out of line, is more, should be set up more for services for our community and additional retail and medical that we don't have in that part of the community. I just feel like we have too much of the flex space that I don't see it being utilized. And then, I mean, I would like to see more architectural guidelines put in that category where those flex space buildings are falling. So that's my, I guess, beef with the flex space building. And then I also wanted to know who sits on the architectural and appraisal board. Can somebody let me know they heard me?
Yes.
Thanks, AJ.
Okay, so just taking some of the.
Go ahead, Curtis. I was just going to say, we can get the information on the architectural board. I was just looking at the clock, and so we can provide that information out for those professionals that sit on that board. Would that be satisfactory?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
I was just going to mention, I think these are policy questions that might be certainly can or would be best discussed along with council. Just note with regard to that Northwest Urbandale and in Plum Drive area around Meredith by Target, the zoning on that northeast corner where Assembled Products and the other two flex buildings are, That zoning is fairly flexible, so it could accommodate retail and service as well. But then on the west side, that is all zoned for retail and service, through that area as well.
Thank you.
AJ, you mentioned the time. Aaron, do you want to just go through those Class A incentive guidelines quickly?
Sure, I can do that while my 9-year-old crawls under my desk. So we're looking at doing some modifications to the Class A guidelines in that, because when looking at the urban renewal plan, it has kind of some very subjective terms in it. This is straight out of the renewal plan when applying for the Class A office, is that a building must be monumental, highest quality, one of a kind, have a recognizable architect, and be landmark and large. So all things that are nice, but really hard to give direction on, give suggestions to potential projects, and also for the committee to have to make a determination on that. So over the last 6 months, we've been working with the architecture review panel, as well as the Economic Development Advisory Board, to create a new document to provide guidelines and suggestions in moving that forward. So we've moved it more towards a more objective standard, and it lays out like a choose your own adventure novel. I loved those when I was in elementary school. So that's kind of how this one got set up, is that to have it be, set characteristics of a building, whether it be 1-story or 2-story, and then having elements that are required, as well as kind of electives to have to meet to be able to get a positive recommendation from the board. Ultimately, it's City Council's approval whether a project gets a Class A, but these guidelines are meant to help out the panel as well as City Council in making a determination. Also, there's language in there to require to be a primary employer type of tenancy with the project as well. So not only looking at the building and the bells and whistles that it has and how it looks, but also the type of development. Can't remember who said it during this process, but the best projects should get the best incentive. And the primary employers within Urbandale are the ones that really help out the secondary sector by creating that wealth in the community. So this Class A incentive should be towards that type of thing. I'm going to just switch real quick to the guidelines itself and be able to answer any questions. Hopefully folks have looked through it quickly. But looking at the design, Mayor, can you see my sheet here?
Not yet.
Okay. Requirement 1.
Aaron, if you
Cross
have,
hatch right
Oh, I have to switch. I see. How do I do that? Pick a different content. There we go.
There we go.
All right. Just needed to hear Nicole's voice, and then I knew I had to do something different. So looking at the requirement 1 is that having it be a 2-story building. Also a 1-story building is eligible, but the 1-story needs to be a much larger building to be able to qualify. And then having requirements like going through Mid-American's energy efficiency new construction program, having foresighted architecture, requiring an elevator if it's 2-story, things that would be expected in a Class A building, whether it be 1-story or 2-story. And then the second part is looking at the elective part of the building, and that is having sustainability parts of it. So green roof options as an eligible type of thing, permeable paving, rain gardens, on-site wind or electric generation, those types of things. So out of this list, the project needs to meet several of these to be able to be qualified. Then the second main requirement, looking at the Class A, is that primary employer. So having high quality employment with that. And so we put some suggestions behind that as to what an eligible business would look like for a project to get the Class A office. So I don't want to go through the details of that, but happy to answer any questions on that. With that. And then the last is some of the exclusions, which are within the urban renewal plan that aren't to be modified, that aren't eligible for the Class A. So noted in the plan is that flex buildings are not eligible for the Class A 10-year 90% rebate, as well as showrooms and shell buildings. So that's my quick run through of that. Again, Curtis mentioned that we're planning to bring this to you on the May 19th meeting for approval with the council letter. But we wanted to have an opportunity to be able to hear from you if you had questions prior to that coming to you at a city council meeting.
And I have a question.
Sure.
This is Matt. The additional elements, it's, you know, there's have the following requirements. That's kind of the shall of it. And then these, like the sustainability and all the maze, from the reading of this document, it doesn't sound like technically they need to qualify for any of these things, right? With the maze.
Yeah, so there's the first is that they shall have, if you're 2-story, they shall have an elevator. This is the 1 through 7 that's here up on my screen. Hopefully you can see that. And then kind of the electives to get your major is the second part. So for a 2-story building, they would need to be able to prove that they are having 4 of the black bulleted items within the project. And then for a 1-story building is increased to having that they need to have 5 within that. So and then the one that has extra clarifications is the sustainability thing. So if they wanted to go for the sustainability elective, they need to show that they have 3 of the hollow bullets on their site to achieve the sustainability minor. I'm sorry, I'm going college on you, but that's how my brain's working today.
Well, I can tell you from my quick perspective of this is, and again, I kind of ran on this particular issue, and this has been kind of my pet project, is the sustainability, energy, environment. And again, I didn't speak a lot on the first half because I understand we have the by right location. We either have to change the underlying TIFs and some of these other things in order to, like what Bridget's concerned with those locations. If they meet the requirement of TIF, we really don't have much choice. So I'm more of on the side of that. If we're going to try to change things, we should change the incentives or change the certain requirements like this. My suggestion, and I don't think I don't know how far this is going to go, is that sustainability one in particular, I would prefer moving it, and this might just throw a wrench into all things, I would prefer moving it up into a requirement, frankly. I know that's, developers may not particularly like this, but I think this is, it would be of all the things on here, I think that would be the strongest and most important aspect, and I would put it into the requirement section, frankly.
I agree.
Yeah, the logic where it's been to date is because all the buildings need to meet our current energy code standards. I don't know if we're at 12 or 15 with those. So there are the requirements in that respect, but yeah, certainly council can decide if it becomes a required element. I think these are still achievable and desirable. So I'm agnostic as to where it would be a requirement or not. I think it
as you should be agnostic. That's good. That's fine. But
yeah, that's certainly something that we'd like to hear so that we can incorporate what the consensus is for the next meeting.
Matt, this is Ron. Are you suggesting that all of those requirements be mandatory?
That towards me, Ron? Or
Yeah.
no, not all those requirements. Just I would just move that bullet up. So if they want to meet 3 of them, that's fine. I'm not saying that everything on that list is mandatory. I would just say that sustainability, if we're gonna for those class
They
8
would have
projects
to
where
meet
we are
3 of those
incentivizing
criteria.
literally millions, maybe if we want a little bang for our buck, if something for sustainability for environment, if they meet 3 of those, to me that would at least be the compromise in my mind is meet the 3, but keep the same bullet the same, but move it up.
Yeah, it would go up to a number 8 up here in a required element is what I'm understanding.
Okay, so I'll chime in a little bit. I mean, is it something where you can change the incentive if they have the 3 so that you get X incentive if they don't, but if it's a Y incentive if they do, to basically buy the incentive, buy the sustainability? Is that permissible? Is that something like that permissible in a development agreement where you know, if you don't have these elements, you get an 80%, but if you have these elements, you get 90?
I think this is a case where staff needs to listen. If you want our input or that of the advisory board and architectural and appraisal panel, we can certainly get that information. So, Mayor, if you want us to do work between now and the council meeting or sort it out here, I think Aaron and I will take notes on what you all would like us to do here.
I think listen, I think today it was more just for discussion, and we're getting some points, and then we can take it up at a future meeting. So
Yeah. So yeah, my question is more just informative, and maybe it's a research item of, can you have a bifurcated agreement based off of what they've put into the building?
This is Aaron. Where my head is at is if there is the language within the urban renewal plan for the Class A office, I believe it says it's a 10-year 90% offering, whether you meet it or not. So it's kind of it's a binary yes or no. It's I don't think it's set up to be able to allow for an a la carte ratcheting up to the 90% incentive.
Right, it would go to, each one would be negotiated somehow.
That would go to the category of a negotiated agreement, which we've only done one, which is the John Deere project.
okay.
So we can, as staff, look at this. Maybe it's not ready for next council meeting. If you would like to look at it some more, but can answer some of those questions and confer with Nikki and our public or our incentives attorney as well.
Yeah, maybe there might be some things coming up after today too that people think about. So let's, I guess I would suggest maybe we, chew on this a little bit individually. If you have any further questions or comments after today, get those in to Curtis and AJ and Aaron, and then we'll find the time to bring this up again for formal discussion and action on this. If anything, does that sound like a plan?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I think that's all we have from the economic development side.
That's all I got.
All right, thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Good discussion. All right, and looking for the agenda again. Nicole, did you have the print mine off.
Mayor, this is AJ. We do the COVID-19 operational review and future planning.
All right. Thank you. I thought we were talking about COVID-19. Do we have, we're getting almost close to 1 o'clock too, but I'll turn over to you if we can.
Okay, in a few minutes or less, COVID-19, it stinks. It has disrupted everything. It is the new abnormal. Any other verb or adjective that you want to use over the last 8 weeks that we suffered through, we've suffered through them. But misery loves company, so we're all in the same boat. Private, public, personal, everything. So what we've done over the last 8 weeks, I think I've kept you fairly well informed of what's going on. Some of it's been dictated. Some has been dictated by the state or federal government about what we can or can't do. I first want to give a shout out to all our employees. They have adapted wonderfully. As I've told them from the beginning, our job is to adjust, adapt, and move forward. And I think we've done that. We've still delivered services throughout the community. Some have been disrupted, mostly hands-on services, library, parks and recreation, for example. But we've been able to do things that we normally do. Park maintenance, street maintenance, refuse collection, police and fire services that we've been able to provide still. Inspections for both construction projects and for inspection requirements that come through community development. Planning, you've seen things come through the Planning and Zoning Commission. Those activities that would normally come through are still coming through. Maybe at a little bit of a lesser volume, but they're still coming through. So again, I want to just compliment the staff for an excellent job that they've done making adjustments in an environment that none of them, and I'll repeat, none of them have ever had to operate in before. And it really runs contrary to the nature of who we are. We are a service business. We're here to serve the public. And when we have restrictions placed on us either outside of our preview or through the city council, that I think we've done an admirable, more than an admirable job of trying to maintain normalcy in this environment of unnormalcy. Now, what I wanted to do is, and I had a little bit longer detail, but I will keep it to a really, I'm looking at my clock as well, so it's 1 o'clock. So you've noted all the things that we've done, and that each week we've almost been sitting on what the governor has said that we can or can't do. There was an announcement today. We anticipate that she was lifting more restrictions on some of the businesses that are within our county. Haven't seen that for sure, but we have someone on staff who followed her meeting today, and I'm sure.
Really quick, she didn't announce, she'll announce it tomorrow. That's why I was on time.
Okay. So we anticipated that to come forward because we saw 77 counties that had less of a restriction than the 22 counties. We knew that for reasons of economic impact and for political expeditions, she was going to have to make some adjustments. We're just reading the tea leaves. We think we're reading them right. So what we're doing, and what I sent out to you, was our program to kind of onward Urbandale. We came up with a really catchy phrase there. And I will first say that this, even though I think a lot of our staff, and we're probably bordering on brilliant at times, that we pleasurized everything we could find out there from other cities and other states of what they're doing. So we try to find benchmarks about what are the things that we thought were appropriate to fit in our community and what we could achieve with the staff that we have. So again, we outlined that, and I sent to you earlier, was our anticipation that restrictions were going to be lifted, that beginning on Monday the 18th, that we would have our staff stop their rotations, except for those who had reasons not to come in, either health concerns, they had childcare related issues, etc., and that we would have a 2-week period that we essentially would get used to working with each other again. Right now, we've been going through alternate schedules through departments. Our inspectors have not come in. They have made the inspections from the field. We'll still anticipate some of that for ease of use to still continue. But aside from the issues that may come up individually or departmentally, our plan is as best we can that we will see our departments come back into the building on the 18th, and that the building will open on June the 1st. We're asking initially that people, if you have business to do with us, please make appointments to come in. We will set forth everything that we possibly can for all the safety provisions and requirements that are in place. Social distancing, sanitizers, gloves, face masks, the whole 9 yards, things that we have learned over these last several weeks that we've either personally experienced or we've seen in periodicals or state or CDC guidelines, we're going to implement. So we have that in play right now that we're going to move this forward. I also wanted to share with you, and I sent out to you, the libraries program for reopening. And that is going to be a staged approach. And I also wanted to, as I put a bit of a cautionary note in, is that this has not been fully vetted and approved by the library board, but they have, is my understanding, I think Catherine is on the line as well, they have seen the plan and they have had opportunities to comment. And again, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but it's my understanding that in general, they're very supportive of the program that we're putting out there. Recognizing also that we're going to coordinate certain activities with other cities. So we're not the only city that opens our library in the whole metro and everybody shows up. That we're not the only city that opens up other programs and everybody in the metro shows up, that overwhelms our ability to provide a safe environment for them. So we think that we have a calculated plan in play that we can incrementally open up our doors and our service levels to the community. We are going to coordinate as best we can with other cities. So again, that no one city is going to be inundated with people who have a desire to use programs X, Y, or Z. And so we have that in play. Other big question marks that, again, we don't have time today, but we want to, and I'll look to schedule, hopefully, if we're available, maybe a time next Tuesday before our regular council meeting. We have programs out there that are time sensitive that we've been trying to get a handle on, and we're still working on, but require more of a council input, and I'll call it the political component of it, is how we go about looking at our pool and how we go about looking at recreation-based programs where we have, you can't do them online or minimize what you can do online. You know, the MAC camp, the other programs that we offer in the summer, those are ones that are hands-on. Those are ones that we're going to have to look at. Can we safely apply new standards to providing these programs? And there are more question marks than answers that we have. And again, we're trying to look at how other communities are going to open things up. And we're looking for state and federal guidelines as far as safety procedures and policies. And then we'll all, meaning all the metro communities, once we open up programs, whatever they may be, we're going to have to adapt to what the communities want. Our members of our community, if we're looking at residents, are they willing to send their kids to a pool? Are they willing to send them to a community program? Are they willing to do other things that their comfort level may not be elevated to the point we may be open for business and there is no business to be had? I mean that in a general sense, but you know, we're going to have to adapt to the consumerism of our programs. Are people willing to look at those and think that those are something that they feel safe sending their children to? And the other one that we have out there that is probably more, I won't say problematic, but it's our senior recreation center. Here we have a group that is, we have a center that is extremely popular, but we're also dealing with the most vulnerable audience when it comes to COVID-19 related issues. And so we also look at the makeup. 50% of our participants at the senior recreation center don't live in the community. And that's basically on our other programs as well. We're about a 50-50 split. So all those things have to be taken into consideration, and the staff is working on those. But probably the more pressing issue, and I'll send out additional information, is the pool. The pool's been closed for a number of weeks. The pool is empty as far as it's been drained. We have furloughed or not hired our summer help, our spring help, the kids that help mostly. And so we have to make some decisions because we have a 44-year-old pool, and part of this discussion has been ongoing for the last several years. What do we do with the pool? How long do we keep it running? What options do we have? How does that play into any possible future development of an aquatic center or a pool replacement in the future? And everything really did change this last spring. So we want to have time to talk with you more on what do we do now, but maybe how it set this up for the future for those future discussions. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have on the material we sent out. I've tried to keep it brief, but we had a lot of things to cover there. So if you don't have questions now, if you can forward those to me, and I would like to see if you would be available for a 5 o'clock meeting next Tuesday so we can talk about some of these items that are a bit more time sensitive.
All right. Perfect. Any questions quick? I know Matt already had to leave for another meeting and I've got one coming up here. So
You're going to be sending us, AJ, more information about the pool, aquatic center, senior center.
On the pool, we're all set up for that. I can get more information on the senior center, Bridget, but my biggest concern right now is on the pool because of the seasonal applications it has as far as people's expectations. And we also know, and Jan's been privy to a number of conversations throughout the metro, everybody seems to be holding on till the end on their pools. And the longer you wait, particularly with an outdoor facility, the more it becomes an easier question for a council to say, don't open it. Because your window of use is extremely small. And so I have information teed up on the pool. I'll see what we can do on the senior center. That's reasonably easy because we know the level of participation. A little bit easier to maintain because that's indoor programming that we can control to 10 people or less. We have space to spread them out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm fine with the 5 o'clock on next Tuesday.
yep, I am too. So let's plan on that.
Okay, thank you. We'll send out a reminder, then I will send out the additional information that we have.
All right. Thank you, AJ. All right. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Ogie will.
Moved.
Bogey first, a Bogey move, Bridget second. All in favor?
Aye.
Go ahead and say aye. Without objection. All right, we are adjourned, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.